Good morning. My name is Maryna. I work for ER24. I'm an emergency care practitioner at ER24, and I'm responsible for what we refer to as the critical care retrieval services. So the guys that will work with us more often will get to know the term CCRS. And that's basically would include the aeromedical as well as the ground ICU divisions. So the day I know today is about troubleshooting, mostly, of Ecmo. So the reason why we are here today is because the ambulance is trouble when it comes to Ecmo especially. It's a challenge. And so we're going to run through a few specific things that we've tried to do at ER24 to assist in that troublesome process of Ecmo retrieval. The reason this picture is up specifically as my first thing is was my fourth inter-facility transfer I ever did on the helicopter. And we get to do ICU medicine in some beautiful and unusual, remarkable places. Can we skip to the next slide, please? So what is critical care retrieval? It's for some people a bit of a new concept, a new word. You know, the more common thing would be an ICU transfer. And there's this, you know, what is an ICU transfer? Well, an ALS paramedic arrives with a ventilator on his ambulance, and now it's an ICU transfer. And that's what we've tried to move away from. That critical care retrieval it's an international concept, and it's a different division of medicine. I mean, if we relate it a little bit to in-hospital field, I mean, you wouldn't have an EC nurse, a trauma-trained registered nurse, wouldn't go and moonlight in neonatal ICU and look after a microprem on an oscillator. And yet in the emergency medical field, in the EMS field, it's out of necessity, but we do that naughty thing where we should be a jack of all trade, and then basically a master of none. So we're trying to move more towards this. This is a critical care speciality of its own. It's an internationally accepted term, and that's why we've moved over to it as well. But the ICU bus, as most people know us. A big thing, so basically, what is critical care retrieval? It's taking a patient who looks like that in an ICU, on an Ecmo machine, on multiple infusions, a ventilator, a monitor, and all that stuff. Next slide, please. And taking all of those things and basically loading it into one of those. Ambulances, aeroplanes, helicopters. Space is a big issue. So basically what we do, next slide please, is we take the ICU sister and intensivist's mess, next slide please, and we stare at it for a long time because it makes us scared. Can we skip please? And we make it nice and look pretty. That's a total lie. This is an internet picture, and it's also from an in-hospital situation. The reality is we do take that patient and load it in the back of an ambulance, and it is small. It is cramped. If you have a look at what's going on in this picture, I can't point at it now. To the right of the bottom of the screen is some infusion pumps. You can't see the face of them. If you want to adjust your doses, you need to. There's a humidifier in front of it. The ventilator is hidden behind the humidifier. Your suction unit is mobile. It's on the side, the gray box in the picture. Your monitor's at the back. That's a patient safety nightmare. It's stressful. So we've specifically, however, sorry, just before we move on to the new point, all those things are important and all those things are required because critical care retrieval, a very important thing is the continuum of care. We no longer live in an environment, because of things like Ecmo, where it's always an upgrade in care. You often have patients with very advanced level of intervention, specifically what will be happening, and at other Ecmo centers is already, but at Pietermaritzburg with the Ecmo Center of Excellence is a patient might be placed onto Ecmo elsewhere, but then needs to move to the Center of Excellence to get the best level of care. We would also then take the team, they will come with us, we go to the patient's bedside, wherever that might be, 3 or 4 hours away, a patient that won't probably survive that flight or drive of a number of hours to get to the ECMO center. So we take the team with us, we put them on ECMO. We now need to be able to establish, to maintain that level of care that's already been established. So if we go to the next slide, we had a big thing then at ER and with Mediclinic to make the back of the ambulance more like an ICU cubicle. So that when you move your patient, that initial patient we looked at on his bed with his ECMO and his multiple infusion pumps, and we move him into a space, this is the back of our current ICU ambulance. It's designed to be like an ICU cubicle, and the reason for that is to make the trouble less. It's access. Your pumps are mounted, your monitors are mounted. This is an incubator, it's a baby now, obviously we do a fair number of them. But everything is visible, everything is safe. If we skip to the next slide, this is a back view from the ambulance. The ambulance is here, it is outside, and when we have tea breaks, or we're welcome to go and have a look at it. This is basically if you stand outside the ambulance and you have a look in. We've done some specific design things with ECMO retrievals in mind. Well, ECMO balloon pumps, that kind of thing. Number one is space. You need to take this guy and load him in the back of the ambulance. That previous picture, I mean, we did ECMO retrievals in there, you can make it happen. But in here, this whole space on the left is open. You can load this whole ECMO machine and it can stand next to the patient because there's nothing occupying space next to the patient. There's extra seats. There can be a third seat at the back. 3 crew can be in the back seated, another one in the front. If we skip to the next slide. On the side wall panel, there's 3 Heyer connectors. So there's 3 points of plugging in oxygen, one for your ventilator, one for your ECMO machine, one for a flow meter. Just skip to the next one as well. 2 of them are visible there, but just above it, that little block with the red numbers, it's something we thought we wanted, lived without it before, and now that we have it, it's one of the things we never ever want to give up. It's a digital oxygen gauge. What you don't think about in the hospital environment is, where does your oxygen come from? It's an endless supply. You plug into the wall and there's oxygen. In the back of an ambulance, there's a limited amount of oxygen cylinders. COVID waves, long distance retrievals with COVID patients has made us very aware of the fact we have limited amount of oxygen cylinders. You can have a visible number on the wall. You don't have to wait for your cylinder to run empty for the ventilator to alarm to know your oxygen is finished. We built in suction on the wall so that you don't have to have the loose box. You plug into the wall, you suction the patient. This is just a quick image of, we procured, it's called the Power Load. It's a self-loading stretcher. The reason I specifically picked this picture is you can see how it's suspended in the air. I mean, if you imagine taking specifically COVID patients that got critically ill, a lot of them are large. So you take 130, 140 kilogram male patient, you put him on the stretcher, you add 6 syringe drivers, a ventilator, a monitor, and some ECMO attachments. That stretcher is heavy, and you have to manually load it into the ambulance. This guy, it hooks, the wheels come up electronically, and it slides in on the base that was visible in one of the previous pictures. So again, eliminating some of the troubles that you face in retrieval. And patient safety is it was a big focus for us, is how do we improve patient safety in an environment that is notoriously bad for patient safety. We can go to the next slide. Just to come back to this one, I know it was up before. A very important thing in maintaining, in getting that continuum of care, of the care that was already established, your equipment plays a crucial role in it. If you take, for instance, again, a COVID patient, what's become a very popular mode to use is APRV. And patients often, when they have been escalated to APRV, COVID patients anyway, they don't cope off of APRV, they don't cope on other modes. So you need to have a transport ventilator that is able of delivering ICU ventilator modes, and not just an SIMB or a CMB. We have the humidifier, sorry, just go back to the previous one. We have the humidifier available, especially now that high flow has become a thing. Imagine 80 liters of oxygen, 100% oxygen through a nasal cannula that is cold and non-humidified. How uncomfortable that is. So we have the humidification, we have the neopuff for the neonates. So if you go to the next slide, The reason why this one is up, it's not for that monitor, everyone knows the Philips, is the ability to continue invasive blood pressure monitoring in transport. So if you have a look at the two blood pressure readings at the bottom, the left one says manual above, 61/16. The right one, ABP, 41/30. This is a neonate. Also, let me just, before the adult ICU sisters all think, what are we doing? But the difference is acute, and that is another transport trouble that you never have to think about in ICU. If the road is bad, am I done? Oh no, sorry. I can talk about critical care for long, so I do need to watch my time. If the road is bad, or you, especially helicopters, have a huge impact on that. When you take off, especially in a helicopter environment, the vibration is a lot. If you're on a bad road surface, either with a very small patient or patients that are very obese, things vibrate more. Trying to think how to be PC. You take a non-invasive blood pressure reading when a patient is bouncing. This is what happens. You get two blood pressures that don't tell you the same picture. So NIBP can be notoriously unreliable in an environment where there's factors such as, even in the aircraft, the fixed wing aircraft, takeoffs, landings, altitude. Altitude affects anything that has a cuff that's filled with air, your ET tube cuff, acute abdomens that is filled with air, like altitude has a big impact. So we've specifically procured monitors and the ability to be able to continue that level of care, to be able to get the monitoring accurate, so that we don't, now you look at that blood pressure and you think, oh, I need to do something about it, when actually if you have your A-line monitoring, you're not that far off the mark. We can go to the next slide. This is also just, this is not my picture, this is an internet picture. This specific, more specific now to Ecmo. Initially, at first value, when you look at this picture, you're like, I mean, I've done some Ecmo retrievals that look a lot more messy. It looks very neat. Everything is nice, it's together, it's packaged nicely. I don't know whose picture it is. If they ever see this on YouTube, I do not wish to insult you. There's some risks that we specifically need to consider with transport, and it's going to be mentioned later, so I'm not going to go in depth into it. But if you consider troubleshooting Ecmo in retrieval, if you've limited yourself, and it's not even just related to Ecmo. I learned this lesson the hard way. I had a patient with a femoral central venous line, and we packaged him so nicely in the vacuum mattress, packed, strapped in, whatever, and it got to a point where I needed to access that TVP, and I just couldn't get to it. Because I packaged him so nicely, we had to first take 3 minutes to undo everything. If we go to the next slide, so keep this picture in mind, where you've placed your pump and your oxygenator and where's your access points. Things like clamping, you need access to your lines. If everything goes great and everything is neatly packaged, it's amazing. But if you need to troubleshoot, you need to make sure you have access to your sites. Where am I going to clamp this Ecmo line? You'll also see the little blue thing. The other thing you need to consider, we can go to the next picture as well. Again, you can't really see it here. Where's your specific, your marker, your clamper point, your clamping point? You also need to have access to your crank. Your hand crank, if you've packaged everything so nicely that you don't have access and you need to troubleshoot, in the previous picture, you would have seen the blue clamp next to the patient that kept that in. There's another blue clamp there, because it's another thing, retrieval specific. I mentioned it before, is vibration and movement. These lines, the last thing you want, and the very first point where it hits you already, as you leave the hospital entrance, there's always a little dip, and then you go onto the pavement, or the paving outside the hospital to get to the ambulance. That vibration causes the lines to potentially bounce. I know in hospital, the sisters are extra good at it, clamps and making things secure, but what you never have to consider is it's going to hop. Why would it hop in an ICU bed? And it wouldn't. Whereas go load that into an aeroplane. Dr. Hilton has done them in the helicopter and the aeroplane. That loading getting that patient loaded is a nightmare. You need to have an extra awareness around how have I secured, number one, to the patient, but then to some steady source on my stretcher, or that if there's a bounce or a speed bump or a terrible road condition, the country that we live in, if there's a sudden movement or a change, it's not going to bounce. Can we go back to the previous picture? Sorry. Where is it going to bounce? That's why there's a securing point, and there's one further down that you can't see in this picture. If there's anything that's pulling, it's not going to, if it hooks on something, it's not going to pull at the site of insertion, or it's not going to bounce at the site of insertion. It'll be steady. But you still need to have access to how am I troubleshooting if something goes wrong. So that is it's a core thing to learn in critical care retrieval, is your planning before you enter the ambulance. What am I going to do if? Can I access my pumps? If you need to take, and it's also that decision, the patient is in ICU on 14 infusions. How many of those do we need to take in transport? We can take 10 of them. Do we need to take 10 of them? Maybe we only need 6. What is safest for the patient? If it's really long and the patient is septic, his feed is going to go with you. It's one of the core things. So it's that planning as to how long am I with this patient? What am I able to do in the transport environment to take him from this ICU and not to do that to his level of care, to that ICU, to be able to do that, just with some modifications. And that's for us, our focus around critical care retrieval is to maintain that level of care in an environment that is very challenging to achieve. We can skip, there should only be one slide left. I'm just going to read it because I'm not going to remember it correctly. Excellence is never an accident. It is the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, skillful execution, and the vision to see obstacles as opportunities. That's basically what we strive for in our critical care retrieval environment. And hopefully with this Ecmo team, now we get that intelligent direction, the team doing this together to bring patients successfully for the expert care at PNB Mediclinic. And that's it from our side.